Welcome to Rising to the Top Lessons in Leadership, brought to you by Columbia University. This is a podcast where we interview senior industry leaders who share the secrets of their success and reveal pivotal moments that impacted their career path. Come listen as they shed light on obstacles they overcame, as well as wins they achieved.
The business to me is not the thing that animates me the most. It's important, and I've had to learn the fundamentals and try to get better. But there's a lot of people that understand business better than I do, I think. What I try to understand is what are people actually going through and how can we help them? And it's turned out that those core ideas actually are central to business. It's just that there's not that many companies, I think, that put as much emphasis on it as we do.
Graham Dugoni is the founder and CEO of Yondr. Since starting Yondr in 2014, Graham has been a leading voice in the emerging conversation about the effects of technology on society. Graham invented the concept of phone-free spaces and phone-free schools. He's the product designer of the Yondr Pouch and the Yondr Home Tray. His mission is to help educators, artists, and organizations worldwide create distraction-free environments where focus and creativity can flourish in the absence of technology. Graham is a former professional soccer player and a graduate of Duke University. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Graham. I'm interested to learn more about your career.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for having me.
Graham, you have a really interesting career as far as that you started as an athlete and then you became an entrepreneur. I was wondering if you could begin by telling us how you were able to leverage your experience as an athlete in the world of business.
Yeah, most of my early life I was a soccer player and up through college. So I remember being told when I was in school that being a student athlete would be helpful to me later in life. To be honest, I don't think I really believed it at the time. But it took me later, I think, maybe 5-10 years later for me to start to realize as I entered the workplace and I was starting, Yondr, and I was figuring things out that actually it has benefited me. I think there's being an athlete, the competitive drive is obviously something that's there and you learn. I think the bigger thing I've learned over time is being an athlete helps with just teamwork in general and the ability to kind of muddle through difficult situations, not complain about them, not comment on them as they're happening, and kind of learning how to put your nose down, get through it, find solutions, and then kind of digest what happened or analyze it after the fact. I think those two, probably competitive drive and discipline, and then the teamwork aspect are probably the biggest takeaways I've kind of considered.
I imagine there's also time management. You mentioned the collaborative aspect of being an athlete as well. Those are things that seem like they would transition very easily.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you're going to be an athlete, you have to be disciplined about how you treat your body, about how you manage your time and your energy. And as you know, now in my career, as the company's grown, those things are really important to me. How I manage my time and energy. But then also there's basics of leadership that you learn in the locker room and on the field. You can't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do. You can't understand what other people are doing if you haven't done them yourself. And those are all things that are they're very tactile things. You have to do them and you have to know what that looks like. And I've tried to carry that over to growing the business where, everything I've done, I've tried to learn by doing it myself. That way, when I'm talking to people on the team, I know what their job is. I know what it looks like and I know what good looks like. And I can help coach them. Can you talk about, I normally ask later, but you kind of set me up for it. Can you talk about what you would consider to be your leadership style? And what was the thing that surprised you most about becoming a leader in business? Well, I don't know. I mean, I never set out to start a company, and I never saw myself, and I still in a way don't see myself as an entrepreneur, just because of the nature of what Yondr does and is for me. It's a passion for me. It's kind of something I feel like I was called to do. It's something very important to me, but I don't know if I have a leadership style. It's constantly evolving. Honestly, I feel like if there's a common thread through everything, it's to learn by doing and to not be afraid to make mistakes. And that's something I try to kind of act out every day, and in not being afraid to take chances, to believe in myself, and then to deal with whatever happens on the backside. Because my hypothesis 10 years ago when I started the company was I wanted to do something important, but I also wanted to gain experience and learn by doing. I didn't want to read things just out of a book. I didn't want to digest just theories. I wanted to learn things firsthand and grow as a person. The idea being that, the person I could grow into and become would be someone who would be ready to make important decisions as the company grew more than the person I was back then. So I think I tried to maybe model that as the company's growing and kind of embolden our team to not be afraid to take chances, to be independent, critical thinkers, and foster kind of an environment that's conducive to that kind of attitude. And I found that if you do that, people grow in confidence, and then their kind of leadership style emerges. So I've never put a label on it exactly. I've just tried to be kind of calm and confident in the things I do. And then if they work, great. If they don't, that's okay too. Take the learnings and move on.
Is that built into the mission of your organization? Like you mentioned that you try and model that for your staff. Is that kind of the way that things are run as well? And you try and encourage them to not be afraid to try things?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a bigger picture. As the world becomes more, so much of modern work is so siloed, and in part of big organizations, people are siloed and they become a cog in a machine. And that's something just as a person in the world, I'm not super fond of. Look, as businesses grow, there's need for efficiencies and you have to organize and create lanes. I totally get that. But I kind of think the type of people we try to attract are people who value their energy and their independent critical thinking. So I always try to create wide lanes for people to run in where they can use their creativity and ingenuity to figure things out. So I try to encourage the team, everyone who joins at any level, to have a perspective on the business and to try to understand it in a 360-degree way, because I think you get better results that way and people have more ownership over their work. And in society at large, I think that's something that's starting to be missing in corporate culture, is a sense of the whole and how what you're doing is important and ties into those things. That ownership has been pulled away from people, probably dating way, way back. And it's something that's important to us. But it's also important to our philosophy of growth, which, look, we are a high growth organization, but I'm not super interested in the move fast, break things kind of philosophy. For us, it's much more kind of move quickly, but don't lose your head. I believe in trying not to, measure twice, cut once wherever possible, and that ending up being the faster and more long-term beneficial way of doing things.
Graham, can you tell me a little bit about what it was that you really enjoyed about playing soccer, and being a professional athlete? Because I'm trying to understand, kind of what moved you or excited you initially prior to you transitioning into running your own business.
Honestly, since I was a kid, it was probably just the love of the game. To be honest, it's the love of the game, and then probably the camaraderie that comes with being part of a team and competing is probably what I loved, I would say, the most. But yeah, it was pure passion, and that's something I really from playing soccer and then starting a business. None of it for me was pre-planned. I didn't have like a matrix that I projected outside of myself and said, this is the path I'm going to choose through life. I kind of have more followed a theme of what feels new, what feels like this is going to help me grow. Where's my passion? And I followed that thread and let it pull me around rather than pushing myself into different things. I've always found that pursuing those other interests have a roundabout, funny way of affecting the thing you're focused on, even if it's feeling like a workaday thing. Following your interest can shed a new light or a new angle that kind of opens things for you. And that's been an interesting learning for me. When I feel like I run into a wall, to me, that's usually a sign not to keep banging my head against the wall, but to kind of stop, take stock of where I am, and feel around for some nook or cranny, some new opening, some new way to relate to the question. And that kind of reignites your interest, and then the energy comes and you don't have to worry about things like hard work because you're interested, you're engaged.
Can you talk, Graham, about how you pivoted from being an athlete to the creation of Yondr?
I think I stopped playing soccer maybe around 2011 and started the company in 2014. But, in the in-between time, I had kind of gone down a rabbit hole for a solid 3 years or so, again, following my interest. And my interest at the time was sociology and philosophy of technology. And, reading people who are talking about kind of the modern condition and what it meant to, especially to live in a world, the prevalence of technology and what that was going to do to people, for people, both positively and negatively. So I think identifying as an athlete and then that transition to me was slow in a way, but probably started somewhere in college, of starting to be interested in other things and realizing that there might be more to life than just soccer, which is a bit of a mental break, to be honest. If you grow up as an athlete, there's being single-minded about things has a lot of benefits, and it's important. And I imagine all the top professional athletes have an element of that single-mindedness that drives them to improve and constantly grow in their craft. So my transition started with me getting interested in other things, and then I think the passion kind of moved away from soccer for me into something else. And and then I kind of moved and followed that interest to the point where I thought I knew what could be done. And then I switched from the world of ideas into kind of the world of making things happen.
Can you explain what Yondr is and what the product does?
Yondr creates phone-free spaces. So if you've heard the term phone-free space or phone-free school or phone-free show, that's us. Before Yondr, there was no such thing. So we introduced that concept from a sociological standpoint, but also how to actually do it. And my belief is that every person, whether they think about it directly or indirectly, they're wrestling with the question of what is the role of technology in modern life, because I think everyone feels it in one way or another, whether it's concerns around privacy, it's distractions, it's the role of social media, it's what is technology doing to the development of critical thinking faculties, and all these different things. There's a common theme that it comes back to. And my belief is that when you create phone-free spaces at a show or for kids in a school setting where they can experience, not having those things for 6 to 8 hours a day or 3 hours a day at a show, that's a tremendously beneficial effect. It opens a window for especially digital natives to experience a world that they didn't know existed. And then they can decide what that means for them in their own life. But inside these phone-free spaces, the things that happen are pretty remarkable, and it allows certain things to flourish that have difficulty flourishing with the prevalence of modern digital technology, not necessarily just phones.
And so you were talking about how after you stopped playing soccer, you were doing some self-exploration. And I imagine that's how you end up creating Yondr. How did you end up with this idea? Where did that come from?
Well, it was a culmination of all the things I was reading, which has spanned a lot of different subjects: psychology, sociology, existentialism, different philosophers like Kierkegaard and Heidegger, and a lot. It was just a worldview for me in a way. But then, the crystallizing moment was I was at a concert and I saw a guy dancing and being filmed by someone, and he didn't know he was being filmed, that it was being posted online. And to me, what that represented, I really didn't like. I didn't like that someone couldn't be at a space and have the freedom in the public sphere to express themselves and not worry about that showing up online. Because if you follow that line of thinking all the way down, that's a difficult thing to imagine at the psychological level for people. How can you be truly free and uninhibited if you're worried about being filmed and recorded? But the overall idea was part of a much broader construct for me, and interest in the role of technology and how we as a society were going to move into the future in a constructive way and use these tools rather than them shaping all aspects of modern life. So that's kind of where the idea came from. In a way, it was a slow boil, and then it kind of crystallized.
And so I imagine when you were first going around, once you had come up with the concept for the idea, for the product, and then you were going around and trying to explain it to people, how was it initially received?
Oh, terribly. I think I got laughed out of, I can't tell you how many rooms. I would go to 8 or 10 schools every single day. I had an old Toyota Dolphin van at the time, like 1978, and I had some pouches in there that I cobbled together. I would go to these schools, and then at night I would go to 2 or 3 music venues all around the Bay, and I started going down the coast to LA and up the coast. But I got laughed out of every room, and when I tried to go meet with investors and stuff, everyone was like, "No, that's never going to happen." So I faced basically constant rejection. But even then, I was confident because I felt like I was talking to so many people. I was so passionate about what I was doing that I would talk to taxi drivers. I would talk to people on the street. I'd ask them questions about how they felt about, the idea of a phone free show, or their phone in general, or the role of social media. What was it doing to their relationships, or did they miss certain things? And so I felt like I had a really good pulse on what was happening on the ground. And when I talked to investors and stuff, I just kind of waved them off and said, "Well," I was like, "You're out of touch. You don't know. I know." So, but it's interesting. The rejection was there, but I learned from it, and I learned how better to talk to people and meet them where they were at, rather than where I thought they ought to be.
When does it switch from people being like, Graham, we think you're on the wrong track, we don't believe in what you're saying? When did you notice that there was a shift?
Well, in 2014, later in 2014, I think I got some of our first customers. The first would have been a school, that kind of classic where someone calls and I pick up the phone. I'm like, "Oh yeah, Yondr here, and let me pass you over to customer service." Click, it's me again, kind of thing. Um, and then and then getting our first artist on board was big. We first started working with Dave Chappelle around that time, and that came out of the blue. I got a call. And at that time, it was me driving around with pamphlets I was making, by hand out of a printing shop in Chinatown. Like that. That's kind of the level I was at. I had no money or anything. I think that started the adoption, the recognition that this could be done, of artists kind of taking up and owning it in their own way. But still, when I ran those early shows, and I was basically acting as a tour manager for Yondr, I was doing the door and interacting with people, I was getting a lot of harsh treatment, but I learned how to talk to people and kind of try to get them on board and win them over. But even so, I would say all the way up to the pandemic, slowly the idea and people's awareness of the issue was gaining traction, and Yondr's growth, I think, precipitated a lot of that. But now, post-pandemic, we saw a huge sea change in people's awareness of some of the problems, I think, associated with people spending a ton of time online, and all the things that connects with.
The fact that Dave Chappelle started having this at his concert, and or at one of his shows, and then perhaps the venues heard about it, other people heard about it, then that was like that's where it began to kind of take off. Like once you had him saying like, "This is what I'm doing," or it was more noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, we started then going on multiple artist tours and doing this, and it graduated pretty quickly to then doing large, arena tours, and that happened maybe a year and a half later, and that changed the narrative considerably, because you had at one blush you had 20,000 people stepping in, or more sometimes, stepping into an arena, and everyone was stepping into a phone free space with Yondr. And so we started to hear from people that, "Oh, I thought I was really not going to like this. I actually like this. I had a great time at the show. This is the best show I've been to in years." And I kind of be going, "Well, why do you think that is?" And they go, "Well," some of them would just say it's an amazing artist, but a lot of them would go, "Well, I think it's because it's the first time I actually haven't had to deal with my phone or anyone be distracted for 3 hours, and everyone was just talking. The energy was great." So I think it started to normalize and give people the experience of what it could be like, and then it just kind of grew.
How did you put up with the constant rejection, at least initially?
I don't know. I'm sure I was discouraged, I think, at different points. But I guess I just committed to, I think at that time and still now, I was committed to just learning and not worrying about the short term result as much. I was kind of determined on the process. The process was going to lead me to where I wanted to go. And that's what I think, that frame of mind is super helpful. And even talking to people, let's say in our sales team now, I always try to emphasize that it's about learning. And once you learn enough, you'll find that suddenly the things that were blockers before turn into yeses, and you don't always know why. It's almost like you've soaked up by osmosis all the things you needed to know, that now it just kind of comes out and people are ready. So I think the process is important. And I learned that through things like music, trying to teach myself how to play piano and music, things that are bound up in the process kind of informed that mode of thinking. But I don't remember always being super discouraged, mostly because a lot of the rejection coming from VCs and stuff like that, I also was able to write off as, I thought, "Oh my God, you guys don't know what's up. You're out of touch. I'm on the ground."
How do you demonstrate this as a product And how do you connect that to its potential impact? Like, where's the proof of concept, I guess?
In the results. So for us, we don't like when a district comes to us or state, like we just point to all the partner districts that have been using Yondr and the results they've seen. So they see higher academic scores, they see dramatic reduction in disciplinary issues and fights. Surveys from teachers show that teachers are happier. So we're at the scale now where we let all of our partners do the talking, honestly. So it's about they can measure and they can see. But there's also plenty of anecdotes too that talk about just what it's like to be a kid that goes to a school that uses Yondr versus doesn't, and the sense of relief that kids have. Because it's I don't think everyone's aware to be a digital native and walk through the world and be afraid of being filmed or recorded at any time, or it's a very different experience. So we try to point to those examples of what students are saying themselves, and that drive the conversation. But in the early days, it was very difficult because I had no proof. I had to find people who are willing to take a shot, and I've definitely found that there is a percentage of the population who are people who are willing to give things a try, and those are people, when you find them and they're supportive of what you're doing, you have to kind of stay close to them, ask for their advice, and support them all the way through. And we did that. We bent over backwards to make it work for those early schools and learn from them. And that's kind of been our building blocks. In the event space, I think last year it'll be maybe it's 7 or so million people that went to Yondr shows. In the school side, there's over 2 million students using Yondr every day. We're in 35 different countries, all 50 states. So yeah, we're getting bigger. We're a global company.
How does that feel to go from not being able to have it anywhere to having it everywhere?
It's exciting to me. It's exciting. The idea of, the more phone-free spaces we create, it creates the cultural change that I think is so important. So that's how I view the company. For me, is a vehicle for those things. I'm still not enamored with or wrapped up in the business. To me, it is not the thing that animates me the most. It's important, and I've had to learn the fundamentals and try to get better. But there's a lot of people that understand business better than I do. I think what I try to understand is what are people actually going through, and how can we help them. And it's turned out that those core ideas actually are central to business. It's just that there's not that many companies, I think, that put as much emphasis on it as we do. So I've kind of found my own. I've kind of backed into business, I guess, and never set out to do it. But I find there are parts of it that I enjoy.
I wanted to ask you about your own use of technology. I mean, obviously, we're using technology right now to have this conversation. Do you find that you have a lot more free time because you're not playing on your phone, or like what is your technology usage look like on a regular basis?
Well, I haven't had a smartphone for 10 years, so I've never had to wrestle with a lot of those things, which again, that's been my personal choice. Not saying everyone should do it, whatever. It's it works better for me. A lot of things are very difficult about navigating the modern world without a smartphone. But in general, for me, it makes people have to talk on the phone with me, which I like, because it slows everything down to a more manageable rate. That's been my thing is there's only so many inputs I think a person can handle. And if you have too many, it scrambles your brain a little bit. So I try to limit my inputs. And to me, that means more in person than anything else, more phone calls than emails, and as few emails as I can reasonably do, knowing that there's still a business to run and do all these things. But other than that, like I've never had social media. The company doesn't have social media besides LinkedIn. So yeah, I think for me, it's all about boundaries and everyone is trying to create in their personalized boundaries around these things. How do you do it? There's no well-formed social etiquette for it. So to me, creating physical boundaries is super helpful. So at home, like I work in one room. I don't do work or things in other parts of my house because psychologically you don't have associations of stress or things like that. But yeah, fundamentally, that's how I kind of manage it. But everyone's a little different.
Do you have any advice for our students?
Well, if I could go back, I would just take the courses I would try to take just the courses I was genuinely most interested in, and I would almost ignoring the major. I know that's not always practical. You have to drive towards something and get credits, but the idea of being, being open to be called to something interesting to you, especially when you're in college and you have the intellectual freedom to do that, I think is so incredibly important and has such a funny way of informing the next steps in your life. And that's probably the biggest thing I see sometimes out of really smart, young people coming out of school, is this desire to know exactly where you're going and how you're going to get there. And I really feel like kind of this quiet listening to what's happening around and following your interests and being open to things that come across you that you might not expect is really important. Because if you're only looking for one thing, you're not going to see what's dragged right in front of you that might be a next step for you. So this openness, kind of keeping goals in mind maybe, but having an openness to being called to something super interesting and not necessarily knowing exactly where it's going to take you, but being okay with that. I think when you're younger like that and in school, you have that freedom to do it. And so I would just encourage young people to loosen up and be okay with that, a little bit of ambiguity.
Thank you for listening to Rising to the Top Lessons in Leadership. For more episodes, subscribe on Spotify, SoundCloud, or Apple Podcasts. To get more information and tips on how you can advance your career, visit Columbia University's Career Design Lab at careerdesignlab.sps.columbia.edu. Please take a moment to fill out our survey to tell us what you think about the podcast. Thank you to Peter Shea for sound editing this episode.